When the European Championship circles back around, we get strapped to the same old tired chairs like your man in A Clockwork Orange, and we're forced to watch the same pictures again and again. We see Bukayo Saka, Darius, Vassell and Gareth Southgate missing penalties, the Icelandic thunderclap, the failures. From Dzajic in '68, Netzer 4 years later and Pirlo in 2012, England have been beaten by class. From fighting in the stands, Phil Neville giving away a penalty and Graham Taylor substituting Gary Lineker, England have also embarrassed themselves. They should have won it by now, shouldn't they? The European Championships, they're fucking great, aren't they? Some say even better than the World Cup because of the concentration of great teams into a smaller tournament. Well, okay, tell that to England as they sat with their thumbs firmly up their arseholes when the pillars of UEFA were painstakingly constructing the likes of Henri Delaunay, Hugo Meisel, Gabriel Hanot and others. They wanted a football in Europe. They gave Europe a football in Europe. Instead, England decided to decline participation at Euro 1960. A blessing in disguise maybe, as nations such as Wales, Northern Ireland and Yugoslavia all placed above them at the most recent World Cup. 4 years later, a different story. England had only been dumped out of the World Cup by the global leaders and eventual champions Brazil. They were coached by Alf Ramsey and had young talent such as Jimmy Greaves, Bobby Moore and Bobby Charlton to choose from. They were about to host the World Cup on home soil in 2 years' time and were starting to cultivate a decent reputation once again that was actually commensurate with how good they actually believed they were. The gatekeepers of football finally entered the European Championships as the field swelled from a suspicious 17 to a more inclusive 29. Either way, England were ultimately ejected by one of the four semi-finalists from the first edition when France destroyed them in a first-round tie in Paris 5-2. UEFA threw them a bone, however, and now as the reigning champions of the world, England were conveniently lumped in with the rest of the home nations as two British home championships acted as qualifying for Euro 1968. Not having to compete against continental foes suited the now knighted Sir Alf Ramsey and his England team down to the ground. A second-half turnaround in the Bernabeu eliminated the reigning champion Spain from the quarter-final playoffs and penciled in England for the main tournament. Up until 1976, the main tournament was devised of a straight knockout semi-final and final. Therefore, needing only 2 matches to win, England were deemed favourites as they travelled to Florence. The hosts, Italy, had been embarrassed by North Korea in England's backyard 2 years prior in the World Cup. The Soviet Union were also at the Euros and helped dispatch of Italy and made the semi-finals at that tournament, even if they didn't meet any capable opposition until the Final Four. Meanwhile, Yugoslavia didn't even qualify. Only one outcome, right? Obviously not. England met the latter in Florence, the weakest opposition on paper, until you reckoned with the youthful brilliance of Dragan Dzajic, who ultimately bagged the late winner, which dispatched of the three Lions. Salt was firmly applied to the wounds when Alan Mullery became the first England player sent off at a major tournament shortly after. They'd spend 12 years in the Euros wilderness. They weren't at the 1972 tournament, but they did contest the match which was seen to have decided the championships. Sir Alf Ramsey and his Chargers were just about clinging on to relevancy after they had been dumped out of the 1970 World Cup in spite of spirited performances against Brazil and West Germany. Some say England's Mexican vintage was better than what they had on home soil. Others declared Ramsey tactically naive after bringing Bobby Charlton off with a positive scoreline in the quarter-final, a move which allowed Franz Beckenbauer to control the game and eliminate the English. Either way, the three Lions were holed up in a halfway house between, still being able to lavish praise upon themselves for being world champions once upon a time, and being over the hill, in front of 96,000 fans at Wembley in a quarter-final playoff. West Germany showed them up to be more so of the latter than the former. West Germany wound up winning the European and World double, whilst English players parked themselves on their double-seater sofas, probably surrounded by hideous wallpaper to watch it all. England's decrepit decade continued well beyond their failure to qualify for the 1974 World Cup, when Sir Alf Ramsey resigned, and his successor, the great Don Revie, was left wanting in the wake of eventual champions Czechoslovakia in the qualifiers. Perhaps what stung the worst was that Wales progressed further than they had done for Euro 1976. Still, lessons were not learned as England closed out the 70s by deciding not to bother with the 1970 World Cup either, as the reign of Ron Greenwood commenced. Euro 1980 was not worth the wait. Not worth the wait in terms of a sequel from a footballing perspective when compared to the magnificence that was Euro 76, and not worth the wait in terms of ending England's decade-long exile. It was a brutish tournament on and off the field, as the reputation of the three Lion supporters preceded them, as they were offered square goes by Italian supporters enraged by the Tottenero scandal that overshadowed the entire tournament. England were only there on the basis of UEFA's generosity. In bloating the competition from 4 to 8 teams, England only needed to progress through a group containing both teams from over the Irish Sea, as well as Bulgaria and Denmark. Despite a European Cup roll call that read like abject domination over the rest of the continent, England's talismen, were from the heroics of Liverpool, Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa, and were nowhere to be seen. Instead, what was an otherwise dour tournament was perfectly characterised by an England team more impotent than your boyfriend after a few pints. One win, one draw, one loss, especially when UEFA only extended the knockout stage to top spot in the group. It spelled the end of England's tournament that never really got going in the first place. England could actually feel aggrieved at the utter bollocks format that was the 1982 World Cup, as their reward for deposing of teams like France and Czechoslovakia was to be paired off with West Germany and Spain. A couple of goalless draws for what was an outgoing Ron Greenwood spelled the end of another managerial tenure. The only excuse England and the incoming Bobby Robson could have for failing to qualify for Euro 1984 was that Denmark had seriously booked their ideas up. A team known as Danish Dynamite handed England their arses. From Michael Laudrup and Alan Simonsen to Preben Elkjær and Morten Olsen and much more, the Danes were vastly superior, both in Copenhagen and at Wembley, the latter stage where Denmark confirmed only their second qualification for a major tournament. England would watch a terrific Denmark reach the semis of a brilliant tournament in France. UEFA had breathed an enormous sigh of relief when it was realised that there would be no English in attendance in France. Less could be said about the 1988 edition, despite of England's self-imposed exile on the club stage from the European Cup. Hooliganism had been trendy during the bus-bombing tear gas throwing 1980 tournament and had only surged to another level entirely as the 80s expired into disgrace. Disgrace both on and off the pitch. With a wasteful Peter Beardsley, a severely undercooked Glenn Hoddle and a Gary Lineker suffering from hepatitis, England were nowhere near it at Euro 88, especially when gift wrapped a local derby against the Irish and the two eventual finalists in Netherlands and the Soviet Union. Ray Horton did for them in the first game, whilst Marco van Basten's hat-trick obliterated them in the second. Tony Adams was subject to a torrent of abuse from both tabloids and punters alike, but he did snatch one of only 2 England goals at the tournament, albeit in another surrender against the Soviets. Despite his best efforts to resign from the pressure cooker atmosphere that was the England job, Bobby Robson had one last roll of the dice in Italy, where England reached the semi-finals of the World Cup in what still remains their joint greatest triumph at winning the Jules Rimet Trophy on foreign soil. It didn't mean that they were any good, however. A jaded Bobby Robson was finally granted his wish in resigning from the manager's post after the cacophony of abuse followed him up until the successful finals in 1990. His successor was the astute club manager Graham Taylor. His success, crucially, remained exclusive to the club game, and unfortunately, England did not like that. Taylor had hardly had the best luck in the world. He received an ageing Gary Lineker playing his final England games and a glut of injuries that would make the modern-day overworked professional blush. Not only were cornerstones Tony Adams and Paul Gascoigne missing through injury, but every single right back that the man tried to call up instantly got injured. Paul Parker kaput, Lee Dixon not a chance, Gary Stevens ruled out, Rob Jones also injured. 4 injuries to 4 separate right backs. Confronted with something akin to a sick kind of curse, Graham Taylor was presumably too scared to select a 5th or a 6th right back, which was sorely needed, and instead played midfielders and ill-equipped centre-halves in the position. This, alongside the refusal to select in-form Chris Waddle, were problems of Taylor's own making as England peaked well before the tournament in defeating France in a friendly. When it came to the games that mattered, the 3 Lions were tamed by 2 goalless draws and a defeat to the host Sweden, as Graham Taylor oscillated violently between the figures of Keith Curle, David Batty and Andy Sinton at right back, and England sent themselves packing on the first flight home. Despite Taylor's incredible post-match reflection where he bemoaned the existence of half-time and his nonsensical substitution of nearly record goalscorer Gary Lineker, he remained in the job. The FA were rightly punished for that, as Taylor led England to such glories as losing to Norway and going 1-0 down to San Marino in a failure to make the 1994 World Cup. Still, they were due to host Euro 96 in a couple of years, so couldn't fail to be at that tournament. Plus, they'd already hired a new manager, and I'll tell you about it after this title card. Eltel, Terry Venables, right. He was the man tasked with delivering football from its world tour and bringing it home, back to where it belonged. The mood, despite a glut of world-class talent, couldn't be lower. England laboured in the friendlies, failing to beat Uruguay, Sweden, Colombia, Norway, Portugal and Croatia in advance of the tournament. Furthermore, the team was hampered by the alcoholism of both Tony Adams and Paul Gascoigne, one of which got a handle on it, the other not so much. Then Alan Shearer decided not to score for his country for nearly 2 years, and in a return to the alcohol, a needless pre-tournament soiree to Hong Kong ended with the salivating tabloid getting scoops of plenty when the dentist chair was splashed front and centre of every red top newspaper in the country. Not even Switzerland, a team who they had pumped prior to the tournament in November, would give England an easy ride, as the 3 Lions dwindled to a draw. The second game probably should have gone the same way, as Gary McAllister squandered a penalty to level the second game up, mere moments before Paul Gascoigne turned on the genius to hand England their first win. All of the bad stuff, the national mood, the draw against Switzerland, the performance against Scotland and Spain was all forgotten in a tournament full of moments for the 3 Lions. Just as Gaza lit up the competition with that volley, so too did the entire team against one of the worst Dutch teams in recent memory in the final group game. For once, penalties dug England out of a hole against Spain before what was their truest performance against the Germans in the semi-final, or as it should be known, the real final. All the hallmarks are ingrained into the English fans' DNA. The Shearer header, the Anderton miss against the post, Gaza getting so achingly close to a crossing golden goal extra time before the end of the tournament. And that was Gareth Southgate's penalty miss in the shootout. It never got so great again, even if that was overinflated. The next century started with a reversion to the 80s, fighting on the streets, dogshit football on the pitch. Venables had chipped, Hoddle disgraced himself, and all that was left was an aggressively unconfident Kevin Keegan, who backdoored England into the tournament thanks to a generous Sweden side beating Poland and a playoff with Scotland. Neither Poland nor Scotland deserved to be sacrificed for England at the tournament, and despite all of that knowledge ingrained into our heads, we went into the first tournament of the new millennium imbued with confidence. Were we put into the hardest group at the tournament? Yes. Did we care? No. Did we think we were going to go through? Abso-fucking-lutely. That self-appointed sense of importance reached a fever pitch within 20 minutes of the first game as the 3 Lions made the greatest start to a tournament ever. Paul Scholes, Steve McManaman, England 2, Portugal 0. So why, 2 3/4 games later, was David Beckham giving the fans the finger as he consoled a crying Phil Neville? Well, England chucked in a 3-2 defeat against that same Portuguese team and had catastrophically let slip another lead, losing by the same scoreline against Romania, where only a point was needed. Even if England did beat Germany in between, it was merely a match of no winners. A bum fight between two losers for the last yellow sticker discount down your local Asda on a Tuesday night. In short, no optimism, no plans, and seemingly no players coming through. Then suddenly we donned the glasses from They Live, marched in unison through the tabloid-induced metropolises to the same beat. We had a golden generation, so now it was a known fact that we had the right to have any trophy we so pleased. We had Neville, Ferdinand, Terry, Campbell, Cole, Scholes, Gerrard, Lampard, Beckham, Rooney, Owen, i.e. about a dozen of the world's best players all spread about across the pitch, and didn't you know, we were now continental. Yeah. We'd hired a Swede by the name of Sven-Göran Eriksson, who was the next big thing, just like Brock Lesnar. He was going to coach us to a trophy. Except not against Brazil, the one of Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, Roberto Carlos and Ronaldo in the 2002 World Cup. Don't worry, it was Sven's first tournament and some of the better talent hadn't come through yet. Some were injured as well. Next time we'll be better. Just you watch. Then we destroy France in the opening game at Euro 2004. Wayne Rooney's giving Lilian Thuram an aneurysm, Frank Lampard's playing out of his skin, and John Terry is solid at the back. Just forget about those last 3 minutes when we helped Zinedine Zidane turn an England win into a French one. Then Wayne Rooney came alive against Switzerland, scoring 1 but credited as 2. Just forget about the first hour, which was diabolical. Then we humiliated Croatia, who were without the stars of France 98, who even led England for a bit, but it was Croatia nonetheless. Then it was Portugal in the quarter-finals, with either Netherlands or Sweden in the semis, and apparently the rest of Europe was busy crumbling underneath the weight of a pokey old Greek team. Now was the time. Michael Owen danced through Portugal inside 3 minutes. The thrashing we were due to hand out to an oncoming team was now being prepared. Then Wayne Rooney broke his foot. England lost on penalties, first in Lisbon, then in Gelsenkirchen to the same opposition as the sands of the golden generation escaped from the hourglass. Would we now be humble? Would we fuck? We wouldn't be humbled by some penalty shootouts, didn't you know they were a lottery anyway? Maybe it was them foreign coaches causing us all the grief. Maybe if we dropped Sven like hot shit and replaced him with an FA man, an English man, we'd win something. So we did, and Steve McLaren masterminded such results as a goalless draw against Israel, a goalless draw against Macedonia. He alienated David Beckham by stripping him of his captaincy before feeling so alienated by the rain at Wembley in a Euro barring defeat to Croatia that he had the fucking temerity to use an umbrella. We still had the best in the world. Our greatest teams were busy making up 100% of Champions League finals in Moscow 3 fucking weeks before every single English person stayed well clear of both Austria and Switzerland for the Euros. Hope was gone. Hope was trampled on when a combination of a militaristic Fabio Capello and a lack of goal line technology ejected us from the World Cup. The fine particles that made up the constitution called hope could barely be made out underneath the world's most powerful fucking space telescope by the time Euro 2012 pitched up on our TV sets. Roy Hodgson was parachuted in as a nation exasperated a collective sigh powerful enough to power wind farms for a generation. And it went as expected. Too scared to lose, not adventurous enough to win a meaningful game, as England were fortunate to creep beside France, Sweden and Ukraine despite not really showing much of any quality, as the fragment remains of the golden generation creaked through each game without any oil. And in the end, the only comfort blanket we had in the post-apocalyptic wasteland that was Euro 2012 was a lightweight, paper-thin hope that penalties could bail us out of a quarter-final against Italy. We even led, felt that national pride and sense of worth broil once again, until Andrea Pirlo put the ball down on the Kiev turf, dawdled up to the ball, pretty much stopped in his tracks, winked at the camera and blew a kiss down the lens before sitting Joe Hart down with a Panenka before tucking the rest of us back to bed for another 2 years. He'd help England do the same in 2014 as a first England group stage exit from a World Cup in 56 years was accomplished. Still, the FA sat back, heads lubricated just about enough so that they could fit it properly right up their own arses as they kept Roy Hodgson on for another cycle. Euro 2016 was next, a tournament expanded to fit 24 teams in, and with the right luck of the draw, even the worst fucking team imaginable could do something, given the correct draw. And England were Wales, Slovakia and Russia, a combination which wielded one win and about 30 minutes of inspiring football. Still, they were reprieved, presumably on the grounds that UEFA felt sorry for them, when they were handed Iceland on a silver little platter, underneath a pristine cloche, an item that only exists in fairy tales and fiction. Funny then, because England's chances of not only winning the competition or reaching the quarter-finals were pure fiction by the time they met Iceland. It all went well. Wayne Rooney scored inside 4 minutes. Hubris returned. Didn't you know? We've got a really good young crop of players that all play for the same team. What's that? They all play for Spurs. Just fucking forget it then. Iceland would go on to win 2-1, with one hand a lack of preparedness from a long throw-in, with the other hand a literal hand almost literally made out of one of them flimsy slices of cooked ham, as Joe Hart ghosted a save right through his mitts. Roy Hodgson ended England's participation perfectly with the line, "I don't know what I'm doing here," at the following morning's press conference. Nobody else knew either, Roy, my man. Surely that was end of all hope. England were now consigned to the dustbin of history. Any chance of restoring former glories would need magic or match fixing. It didn't matter the players, it didn't matter the tactics, it didn't matter the manager. Winning football tournaments, or even being slightly good at football tournaments, wasn't an English thing apparently. It was best to just sack it off, enjoy the 4 weeks every now and then, and before returning to the main event of hating your own life and living in the 90-minute slivers every 3 to 4 days when club football came back. But then it happened. Sam Allardyce. The nation thanks you for being the cocky, overconfident, proper muck on the bottom of your shoe type of person. One win against Slovakia in the 5th minute of stoppage time was enough to balloon him off his own tits on confidence. He called the clandestine meeting that ended his tenure entrapment as he was caught on camera breaking the rules. What we should call it is a national fucking holiday. Even if for the remainder of the year it only felt like it was getting worse, as 3 qualifiers with Malta, Scotland and Slovenia spat out 5 goals, 7 points and roughly 0 reasons to be optimistic. The man now in charge on an interim basis until the end of 2016, Gareth Southgate. Speedily promoted from the under-21s, he would earn the full-time job after the 4th outing, a friendly draw against Spain. Whilst on the surface 2017 didn't look up to much and included a failure to defeat big nations in Germany, France, Germany again and Brazil in friendlies, as well as drawing to Scotland at Hampden in World Cup qualifying, as well as scraping 1-goal wins over Slovakia, Slovenia and Lithuania, something was actually happening. We didn't have the best players in the world anymore, and whilst we did have those Spursy young players, they had matured a little bit. We'd got a tactical system, even if it was a rudimentary one, and a thoughtful manager who actually shaped a way of thinking about the ubiquity of football tournaments, instead of thinking game to game. We had a mouthy goalkeeper called Jordan Pickford, an old Kai called Young playing out of position at wing-back, a back three featuring a man with a slab for a head, an error-prone centre-half and another player out of position. We had an overlooked right-back playing right wing-back, a holding midfielder who was not a holding midfielder, 2 teammates beyond him who played largely 6 out of 10s but were capable of flickers of genius. Beyond that, 2 genuine world-class talents up front. And then they all went and equalled England's best World Cup performance on foreign soil in Russia at the 2018 World Cup. And much more they came back. They restocked with a Swiss Army knife of a tactical plan. They got better, younger, fresher players and broke more records. The nation fell back in love with the national team as England reached the European Championship final in 2021. Only for the most English thing possible to return to the front of our minds: a penalty shootout defeat. We thought we had it all figured out. We were better, smarter, we had home advantage, and we'd conquered some pretty inescapable demons, from the endless carousel of quarter-final defeats and the even more endless void of penalty disasters, but still, it wasn't enough. They can't say we can't beat a quote-unquote big team and then teams like Belgium, Croatia, Germany, Italy and Spain all fall to us in competitive fixtures. They say we can't match the absolute best stride for stride when it matters. Then we meet France in a World Cup quarter-final, meet them head-on and miss out by another of those barest of margins. For all the years of hubris and rampant overconfidence, this is the only period, these last 3 years, where it has been deserved. So maybe this summer will be the final page of an anthology of failures that concludes at chapter 58. Or maybe by the time this goes out, they've already been eliminated from the group stages. Can we honestly say England have deserved to win a European Championship? In 1996, a summer that we have been waterboarded with the better part of a generation, it could be said England were lucky to escape the group. In 2004, England were a band of individuals stapled together into a system that didn't suit them by a manager that couldn't shirk his own beliefs on how the sport should be played. If penalties hasn't stopped them, then sheer class has. Teams like Yugoslavia, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Sweden, Germany again, Romania, Portugal, Italy and Iceland all deserve to beat England. The closest they deserve to becoming one-time champions of Europe was 3 years ago, the closest any team has come to winning their first European Championships. Unless England have been spectacularly bombed out of the group phase by the time this goes out, the trajectory will remain on an upward curve that Gareth Southgate has stage managed. His football or his player selection might not be to your liking, but there's no doubting the team spirit he's fostered. There's no doubting that it has taken the national team to places it hasn't been since Sir Alf Ramsey lifted the Jules Rimet Trophy at the old Wembley. Could a manager have already won something with this team? Nobody will ever be able to find that out. Is this anthology of failure going to continue beyond this summer or end in glorious fashion in Berlin next month? Let us know.